Welcome to JS on Politics. I'm your host, Greg Borowski. It's May 5th. That must mean it's time for the fall election to start. Let's take a look at what we have ahead on today's show. We'll take a look at how presumptive GOP nominee Donald Trump will fare in Wisconsin against presumably presumptive Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. We'll look at the fallout of a Trump nomination on other politicians in the state and see how Trump and Clinton have fared on PolitiFact's Truth-O-Meter. Then we'll talk with columnists James Causey and Christian Schneider. A hint here, one of them is a little happier than the other. We'll give you the winners and losers of the week, and we'll take your questions as always, so please send those in. But first, to set the table, we're going to go to this taped segment looking at the presidential race and how it's shaping up here in Wisconsin. All right, we're joined now by Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief, to talk about the presidential race. And Craig, what a difference a single state makes, apparently, in terms of the shakeup of the race. Let's start talking there about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton as the presumed opponents in the fall. How does that shape up here in Wisconsin in a battle between two people with high negatives, and neither one of which won the state primary?
Yeah, I mean, it suggests a lot of weakness on both sides. I mean, in a sense, both candidates have their dream opponent. So it is kind of an X factor, the fact that they're both not only unpopular overall, but they have high negatives with a lot of critical voting groups like independents, suburbanites, college-educated voters, you name it. Now, it's important to note that Trump's numbers are worse than Clinton's numbers, and that means something. I mean, as bad as Hillary Clinton's numbers are in some regards, Trump's numbers are worse. In fact, Trump's numbers are unlike anybody's numbers that we've seen for a presumptive major party nominee in recent times. And so I think it's more troubling for Republicans because his numbers are so bad that it's just hard to imagine him winning without transforming his image in some fundamental way, because he's not only got huge problems and hugely high negatives with voters outside his party, but he's got a lot of weakness with voters inside his party, which is not nearly as true of Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so looking at the map of the state, if you think back to the primary, Donald Trump did a lot better in the outstate regions than some of the core Republican areas around Milwaukee County. How do you think what happens with the WOW counties, Craig? Do they come around to Trump in the fall, or what's going to happen there? Well,
these are counties that have a history of turning out massively for Republican candidates, but they don't turn out for everyone. And, they turned out like crazy in governor's races for Scott Walker, but their turnout for John McCain, for example, was somewhat underwhelming. They really do have to deliver staggering margins for Republicans in order for a Republican candidate to be competitive statewide in a presidential election. Right now, it's kind of hard to imagine that happening given how much these voters turned against Donald Trump in the primary, given how unpopular in the polling Donald Trump was with Republicans in these very Republican counties. So it's going to take, I think, a concerted effort by Republican leadership in the state and some party unity to kind of to mobilize that vote. And right now, the signs aren't great. The one thing that does unite these voters, of course, is their distaste for Hillary Clinton.
Okay, let's take a look at the national map as well. There was an analysis out earlier this week that said that, look, if Hillary Clinton simply wins all the states that went the last 6 times for the Democrat, which would include Wisconsin, and adds Florida, she's the nominee. So where does Donald Trump go to make inroads and make it competitive for Republicans?
So he's really got only 2 choices. I mean, under the current map, the map as we know it, he basically needs the equivalent of an inside straight because he has to win almost all the truly top battleground toss-up states the way the electoral map works right now. Or he can expand the map, which makes his job easier. It's tough to do, though. I mean, the most likely place you can imagine him trying to expand the map is places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the Great Lakes states. But these are also states, in the case of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, that have been consistently voting Democratic, not by a lot, but very consistently. Donald Trump has argued that he can appeal to voters, kind of Rust Belt, blue-collar voters upset about the economy, that he can bring those on board. I mean, none of the polling is very supportive of that right now, but I think his best way is to try to expand the map, and that's the one place in the country demographically that seems at least theoretically receptive to a Republican presidential candidate.
All right, and let me just try one last question here. Because we're having some trouble with the connection, but looking down the ticket a little bit, how does, should Ron Johnson be concerned? Should Republicans be concerned about the Reed-Ribble seat? I mean, what are they thinking now as the fall election?
So I guess the answers are yes and yes, in the sense that when you've got a candidate at the top of the ticket who doesn't perform well, and if Donald Trump doesn't perform well, that can hurt people down ticket in a couple of different ways. It can just depress Republican turnout. So you could have fewer Republican voters, and also independents, may be driven more. You have to have more independents voting for the Democratic candidate at the top of the ticket. Given the decline in ticket splitting in Wisconsin, that could also mean more independents voting for Democratic candidates down the ballot in places like the Senate race, and places like the open seat in Green Bay for the 8th congressional district, now represented by Reed-Ribble. So those are the big dangers. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but concerns for all Republicans.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Craig, and there'll be a lot more to chew over in the coming weeks.
Okay, next time.
All right, we're back live now, joined by Marissa Bakus, one of our political reporters here in the studio, and Patrick Marley from Madison. I'm going to start with Mary. So a week ago or so, it was all going to come down to California on the last day, and instead it all came down to Indiana on the Republican side. Were you surprised by how this all played out the other day?
I think the polling started to indicate that Trump was going to win, and it started to look pretty clear that Indiana was going to be the death of the Never Trump movement. And, I thought Cruz might stick it out, and maybe Kasich, since he seemed to be pretty determined to stay in the race. But I think once the numbers were coming in, there wasn't much of a point.
Yeah, so basically they just could switch the hashtag, because now it's the Never Hillary movement, right? And everybody's adjusting. You were with Scott Walker the other day, and what was his reaction? He was a Cruz supporter, and he was, of course, a Walker supporter before he was a Cruz supporter.
Correct. Yeah, so he had an appearance yesterday in West Allis, and I don't think I've ever seen him look so dejected other than when he got out of the presidential race on September 21st. He was very subdued. And basically said that when asked why he was backing Trump, it was basically all about how bad Hillary is. Didn't hear a lot of praise for Trump himself, but basically, he's our nominee. He went back to that he had pledged to support the Republican nominee back during the first Republican debate while he was still running. He obviously, in the months that followed that, consistently hedged and tried to not say he was going to be backing Trump. But went back to August 6th, I think was the debate, and said, I pledge to support the nominee. I'm going to support the nominee.
Yeah, well, Patrick, what was your sense? I know you've been talking to some of the other Republican leaders and folks around the state. I mean, some are getting on the Trump train and some aren't. And what's happening as people are responding to this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's sort of all over the map. One thing that's interesting is, for instance, the state Republican Party didn't put out a statement yesterday. Typically, when their candidate would be known, they would put something out and champion that person, talk about how they were going to win in the fall. Radio silence from them. We heard, everything from people like Jim Steineke, the Assembly Majority Leader, who has been a never Trump guy, still very skeptical of Trump, but not saying absolutely no way, just saying never Hillary, but leaving open, at least opening the door just a little bit, that could support Trump. And then Senator Fitzgerald, the leader of the state senators, saying that he's on the Trump train.
Yeah, well, talk about the dynamics here of this election, because you're going to have, assuming Hillary hasn't quite put Bernie Sanders away, but that's where it's certainly headed, but two very unpopular people with high negatives, and so neither one won the primary here. But what does that do for the idea that you want to be able to? They always say it's better to have people who want to vote for somebody than who wants to vote more against somebody. Mary, what do you think?
I think that obviously Trump didn't win Wisconsin, Hillary didn't win Wisconsin. However, there are certain people who are feeling the burn, who say, I'm never voting for Hillary, and there are some people who said they never vote for Trump. However, I think given the choice, some of the Bernie supporters, if that goes that way, will come around to Hillary versus Trump. And I think that some of the Cruz supporters or the previous Walker supporters are so dead set against Hillary that they will come around. Maybe some will sit it out like they say they're going to. Maybe I've talked to diehard Republicans who say they're considering voting for Hillary. I will, believe it when I see it. But I just don't know. Maybe it'll drive down turnout. I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick, one of the hallmarks in Wisconsin has been that the presidential turnout is always so much higher than the off year, the gubernatorial year turnouts. Do you see that changing at all this year? And if it does that give Johnson a better chance or a worse chance, or how does he fare in his bid against Russ Feingold?
Well, I think we'll see high turnout in the fall. We always do in presidential elections. We're one of the states with the highest turnout, but I think it's dampened somewhat because there are some Republicans who are going to want to sit the race out because they just don't like Trump. So, and that hurts Johnson. I mean, I think that Ron Johnson already had a big challenge in his Senate race this year. Having Trump at the top of the ticket is going to be harder for him because Trump is someone who has divided the Republican Party. There are people in distinct camps there. He's saying he's supporting the nominee, but he's going to have to address questions. Anytime Trump says something controversial, which will be often, he's going to have to respond to that, and any time he's responding to that is a time when he's not talking about his own message.
Yeah, well, I spoke earlier with Craig Gilbert about the sort of the congressional level, but let's talk, Mary, about when you get down to the state Senate and Assembly seats. We've heard about the redistricting and how favorable this turf is for Republicans. Does this tilt that at all? I mean, are they at danger of losing some of those seats that would otherwise maybe appear safe for them?
Republican leaders, especially in the Assembly side, have said during the primary, they said that Trump would hurt Republicans all the way down the ticket to Assembly seats, that they were worried about the effect that he would have down to basically every Assembly district. So I think that's something that they're certainly concerned about. And, he is controversial. I can't imagine that tons of Wisconsin Latinos are going to turn out to vote for Trump. So I do think that there's probably some concern that they might lose some seats in the Senate and Assembly. Yeah,
well, let me ask you, Patrick, if we'll play the what-if game a little bit. So if say, the Democrats win back one of the chambers, what does that do to Scott Walker and his approach for governing the state, where he's had a very favorable, two houses, backing him on most of the things he puts forward?
Right. Well, first I'd say I agree with Mary that this could very well trickle down to the Assembly and Senate races and help Democrats a lot in gaining seats. That said, still, those maps are very favorable to Republicans. It would be really hard for the Democrats to take back either chamber. If they're going to take one back, it would be the Senate. But that is a steep climb. If they were to do it, it'd be the first time we'd see Governor Walker in a meaningful period of having to figure out how to deal with Democrats. He's had basically one-party control his entire time. This would be writing a budget with very different views on all of the major issues facing the state. And so I think, instead of budgets getting done on time, we'd see them drag into the fall. There'd be a huge fight over Obamacare. There's a bunch of federal money available that the Republicans have declined to take because of their opposition to Obamacare. The Democrats are going to say that's hundreds of millions of dollars that they could use to prevent further cuts to the University of Wisconsin or to K-12 education, and it'd be a very drawn-out fight.
Yeah, well, let me ask, before we shift gears here on the presidential things, there's a lot of people who've underestimated Donald Trump from the beginning, including, President Walker. There's enough of others who've underestimated they could fill a Trump cabinet, right? So why do we think things will be going according to form and conventional wisdom now? Is there a danger, Mary, for Democrats who are maybe underestimating Trump and thinking, well, this is going to be a cakewalk for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some Democrats who probably would have rather seen Hillary go up against somebody like Cruz, who is more of a known, who's obviously extremely conservative. Trump kind of has, he's kind of waffled or flip-flopped a bit, obviously not on issues like immigration and the wall, but other issues where I think that they just don't really know what he's going to say next, and I don't think any of us really do. I don't know that Donald knows what he's going to say next.
Well, that's why we have our weekly show, so we'll come back to this topic next week. I'm going to leave it there with Mary and Patrick, and we're going to go right now to a tape segment on the Truth-O-Meter and how the two candidates have fared on that. We're joined now by Tom Kircher, one of our PolitiFact Wisconsin writers, to take a look at how Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have fared on the Truth-O-Meter. So we'll start, though, with just to look at the overall numbers for Hillary Clinton and how she's fared over time. You know, she, of course, has been in the public life for a long time and run for president twice. So on the true rating, she's at 23%, working her way down to at false 11%. You can see on the screen there how she's done overall. Let's go to three of her statements we wanted to talk about today. And the first one is that about 1% of all the gun sellers are responsible for more than half of the guns that are used in crimes. And we rated that half true. Tom, talk about that.
The latest data show that gun crimes are linked to 1% of all gun sellers. In other words, the guns were sold originally by 1% of the sellers. But that latest data is pretty old. It's from 1998, so we don't really have a good current look at what the numbers are.
All right, and the next thing we wanted to look at is the Republicans, quote, still want to privatize Social Security. In fact, their whole idea is to turn over the Social Security Trust Fund to Wall Street. We rated that mostly false. And that's a big issue with Paul Ryan, of course, that we've heard about a lot here in Wisconsin.
And this was an exaggeration. I mean, Ted Cruz did propose some kind of limited privatization of Social Security. But Hillary Clinton's claim suggests that we're just going to turn over, the Republicans want to turn over your payroll deductions for Social Security directly to Wall Street without having any input, and that's just not the case.
All right, and our third one from Hillary Clinton is we have tougher standards holding toy gun manufacturers and sellers to account than we do for real guns, and that one was rated half true.
This was a pretty complicated legal question. Some of the legal experts told us that gun manufacturers do have less liability, less ability to be sued, but other experts disagreed, and they felt like gun sellers and toy gun manufacturers had about the same liability.
All right, and let's shift now to Donald Trump and start with a view of how he has fared overall on the Truth-O-Meter, and it's a little less skewed in the opposite direction than Hillary Clinton, and some of that at times can be just he's a very off-the-cuff guy. Hillary's a lot more prepared in her remarks and how she approaches things, but he only has 2% in the true category, working to false at 42%. And we're going to take a look at a couple of the Donald Trump claims now. The first one is, quote, frankly, Hillary Clinton doesn't do very well with women, and that one was rated pants on fire.
That one seems to contradict conventional wisdom, right? And that's what the evidence showed. I mean, he was making reference to the fact that in some of the recent Republican primaries, he was doing pretty well among women, but that really has nothing to do with Hillary Clinton.
Dynamic,
right,
yeah.
Right.
Hillary wasn't running in the Republican primary.
Right, and the recent polls show that Hillary Clinton's support among women is much higher than Trump's support among women.
Okay, the next one, the statement was ISIS is making millions of dollars a week selling Libyan oil, and that one was rated false.
ISIS has been attacking the oil fields in Libya, but they're not able to seize the oil, refine the oil, sell the oil, so that's just not correct.
All right, and the last one was a quote from Donald Trump that we've rebuilt China, and that one was rated half true.
There's some truth to it. I mean, you have to give credit to China just opening up their country quite a bit more, a lot of reforms. At the same time, China has benefited from being included in global trade, and the U.S. did have a role in that.
All right, so that's where we'll leave our assessment for now. There are many more fact checks on our website, politifactwisconsin.com, or just politifact.com for the national site. And we'll hear more from Tom throughout the campaign as we get closer to November. All right, we're back live now with two of our editorial page columnists, James Causey here in the studio, and Christian Schneider, who is pouring what I only can hope is a glass of root beer in Madison, who might be a little disturbed by the election results. So, Christian, are you with us?
Sorry. I'm here, yes.
Okay, you're here, and for our sensitive viewers, that is root beer you're drinking, correct?
Or is it absolutely
to drink? Okay. Root beer possible. All right, so Christian, I have to start with you, though, because you had a column this week that the headline was RIP GOP. You've had a day to think about it. Are you still feeling that way?
I feel even more that way now, actually. I mean, it's kind of interesting that for the last few years, people have said about the Republican Party, they're held captive to the radical right within the party. And then now we're in a situation where the major party nominee is a guy who isn't conservative and is only tangentially Republican. So that leaves the party in a spot where conservatives, people like me, are almost kind of homeless now. We have no home within the party that we've always kind of used to to propagate our ideals. So I mean the party's going to have to be completely different now. I think.
Do you think it would be that different going forward? I mean, is this such a seismic sort of change that it'll change, the next, or will it be looked back as, well, Trump was Trump and it was a crazy thing and it's sort of back to the track it was before?
I think it's going to change it for a little while. I mean, I think the party is going to cease to be kind of a national party anymore. I believe that the U.S. Senate's going to go to the Democrats. The presidency is. The Supreme Court's going to be run by liberals. So the Republican Party's got to kind of build from the ground up, and I think you do that at the local level now. You've still got 31 states that have Republican governors, and I think Republicans are going to have to show people on the local level now what they really stand for and kind of work their way up from then.
All right, it seems like James maybe should have a bottle of champagne over here based on Christian's prop there. But what was your take, James, of
my
how
take
this is playing
this.
out?
Christian said that he says that they don't have anyone to stand on. Yes, you do. You have Donald Trump. That's what you chose. That's what you're stuck with. You started with 17 candidates, 17, and you whittled it down to this one candidate. So that's what you're stuck with, and so you have to deal with it.
But do you see any challenges on the Democratic side if Hillary Clinton is the nominee who's not well liked, has a lot of skepticism about? Well, if you look at the approval ratings, she doesn't have high approval ratings.
Okay.
But between the two of them, they're two of the worst on that measure going out there. Is that problems for the Democrats? Can they really truly get behind Hillary Clinton?
I think they're going to have to. Unfortunately, I've been a strong supporter of Bernie Sanders, and I made that public, and I wrote a column on it. But I think after California, I think it'll all center around Hillary, and it'll be interesting. I think the Republicans are damned if they do, damned if they don't. If Bernie somehow pulls off 95% victory and comes back, I still think that they'll lose it when it all boils down. Hillary is going to be the candidate, though, and it's going to be interesting to see how they debate.
Mm-hmm. Well, Christian, let me ask you this. So, looking ahead, let's just put the best possible spin on it for the Republicans. What's your best case scenario for the fall for Republicans?
A meteor hitting the Earth.
Okay, that's not very good for all of us. Hopefully it'll be after our show some Thursday, right? Yeah.
Let's see. Best case scenario would be holding the U.S. Senate, which seems almost a foregone conclusion now. I don't think there's any way Trump wins. So if they are able to retain the House and a lot of the local races that are on the ballot in these states, I think that's the best case scenario. I mean, if somehow a third-party candidate, conservative candidate, were able to get on the ballot in a lot of these states, so there's someone like me could actually go out and vote for, I think that helps the down ticket quite a bit. So they may need some help from third party, I think.
All right, let me ask you then, what's your worst case scenario? I think we may have kind of already heard it, but tell us what's the absolute worst case here? I mean, do they lose the legislature here in Wisconsin as well, or what do you see as the worst case?
Oh, well, that would truly be the worst case scenario. I mean, Republicans have such big majorities in the Senate and the Assembly here, but yeah, I mean they could lose the House, the U.S. Congress, the Senate. They could, obviously the Supreme Court is going to go to whoever Hillary Clinton nominates, or maybe they approve Merrick Garland before Hillary gets to him. So yeah, it's losing complete annihilation of the Republican Party is kind of the worst case scenario at this point.
All right, and James, what's your best case scenario for the Dems in the fall?
Best case for the Dems will be Hillary Clinton picking a very strong vice president, someone to go alongside of her to pick up her approval rating, someone that's well liked. Worst case scenario would be the emails coming back on her. I think that's one of those things that's hovering in the back, that if that comes back hard, it could cause some bumps in the road for her.
Okay, we're going to shift now to our winners and losers of the week. And James, we'll start with you. So just give us your winner first, and then we'll get Christian's winner.
Winner is easily Bronzeville. Bronzeville had a uptick this week. We got news that the American Black Holocaust Museum is coming back. with a new property. They're going to be on the first floor, and that's great for that area.
Yeah, and tell people who aren't familiar where Bronzeville is and some of the history there.
Bronzeville is along on Milwaukee's northwest side, along North Avenue and 4th Street. It'll be this new facility, be in a 2200 block of North 4th, and it's a celebration of James Cameron's life. James Cameron, who died in 2006, was almost hung, or nearly hung, years ago, and he survived that. And he put together America's first and only American Black Holocaust museum to celebrate his life and celebrate the lives of those people whose lives were not told, who were hung. So that'd be fantastic.
Okay, and that's a development they've talked about for years that hasn't really gotten going.
Yes.
So, Christian, let's give us your winner of the week.
As much as it pains me to say it, the winner this week is Russ Feingold. With Trump at the top of the ticket, Ron Johnson, the incumbent, had a tough race ahead of him already. He was already running behind Russ Feingold, and with Trump at the top of the ticket, and with Trump's unbelievable disapproval rating among Wisconsinites, it seems like it's a foregone conclusion now that Russ Feingold is going to retain the seat that he lost in 2010. I just don't see any way that Ron Johnson somehow overcomes the natural disadvantage from the top of the ticket.
All right, and Christian, why don't you give us your loser right away?
Another one that it pains me to say, because I'm a friend of his, is Reince Priebus. I don't know what he could have done different, and I'll continue to support him. But when you're at the top of a national party that implodes, like the Republican Party just did, that definitely can't be good. And now, it's going to look like one of the biggest failures of all time when Trump is beaten so badly that, through a whole process that's supposed to pick the most winnable Republican candidate, and they end up with the one that actually couldn't win. So it's going to look bad.
All right, and James, let's get your loser of the week.
My loser this week is Sheriff David Clark. Unfortunately, he came out in support of a monument for Jefferson Davis in Kentucky. I wish he would just focus on the issues here in this state and in this county, Milwaukee County. But his support of this Confederate monument is very disappointing. If I could just read a quote from Jefferson Davis, who said, "African slavery, as it exists in the United States, is moral, a social, and a political blessing." And that's who Sheriff Clark, he wants that monument to stay up.
Okay, so we got our winners and losers. That means the only thing left is to get our reader and viewer questions here. So I'm going to first throw one to Christian, and this is from Matt, who says, "Can Donald Trump expand the electorate enough with new voters in the general election to overcome the demographic deficits he is currently facing?" And if you pick up your glass, I'll understand that you're saying no to that one. But what's your response?
The answer is no, he cannot. When you have a Republican candidate that starts out with almost 0% of Hispanics, 0% of African Americans, these aren't groups that typically go to Republicans, even though George W. Bush picked up quite a bit of the Hispanic vote in his races. You're already so far behind. The dream of the Trump ticket is that, we're going to pick up all these working class, white, disgruntled, blue collar guys. But that's a shrinking demographic here in America. And, so to pin your hopes on a demographic that's shrinking and not one that's growing, like Hispanics, like, young people and minorities, that's just a losing proposition all around.
All right, and James, let me throw this question to you. This is from James Doe, who says, "What will be the final margin in Wisconsin for Hillary and Russ in their landslide win?" So put your prediction hat on.
All they have to do is get 51%, so I'm going to go 60 and 58.
Okay, 60 for Hillary, 58 for Russ.
Yes.
We'll come back to that one in a few months. And here's... for Christian, this one is from Rocky, whose question is, should we trust Trump with the football? And the question included a very detailed explainer, so we knew that he meant the nuclear football, where you can, get us in, launch nuclear attacks from anywhere that travels with the president. Can we trust him with the football?
We couldn't even trust him with the USFL. I don't know how we can trust him with a nuclear football. My answer would be no. I can't envision a Trump presidency, but God, if it ever happens, I hope there are people around him that can tell him no, that can provide him with some guidance. Otherwise, it's my head's just going to explode at this point. I just don't know what to say.
All right. Well, that leaves us with no more time today. James and I are going to go back to work. Christian, I believe, is going to go out and build some sort of fallout shelter for this meteor that may be coming. But we hope that you guys will join us next week at this regular time and location. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.